Hi, all. Second part of the final chapter of Fires of Prophecy, Book 2 of the Morsai Saga. Um, a quick recap. They rescued Maiko. James unleashed the volcano erupting, fireballs flying everywhere. They got to get off the island. The guy who they originally captured and had forced them to bring them to the island, they had tied him up on the boat, but he must have gotten loose because the boat's gone. Now, with all hell breaking loose, they got to find another way off the island. So, chapter 29, part 2. I knew we should have killed them, Jerome exclaimed. Now I was going to raise the alarm that the ones they were looking for on the mainland are now here. Behind them, another blast erupted into the night, throwing fire and lava in all directions. He looked at James and continued as he gestured toward behind them, as if they wouldn't be able to figure it out with that going on. How are we going to get off the island now? Michael asked. There's still the dock over by the smelters, James replied. It's farther south, but it's our only hope. The weight of impending doom settled upon him. I don't think we have much time. As they moved through the forest, Essen asked, Time for what? James glanced back toward where the fire and lava shot into the sky. Before the entire island goes. Goes where? Michael asked. Kaboom! He shouted really loud, raising his arms for effect, taking everything and everyone with it. Apparently, this area used to be volcanically active long ago, and I seem to have begun a series of events which is going to bring this area back to life. With renewed determination, everyone picked up speed as they crashed through the underbrush, headed to the southern docks. James took a turn at carrying the comatose Nate, giving Essen's arms a break. When they came to the smelter area, there was a flurry of activity going on as people loaded long bars of iron onto wagons. Some wagons were already loaded and on their way to the southern docks. There must be a ship there, figured Jerome, and they're trying to save as much of the iron as they can. Then we'll just have to convince them to take us along, James said as they remained in the forest and skirted around the buildings. Do you think they will? Asked Essen. James just looked at him and shook his head. It'll end up being us or them. Oh, right. Yeah, I don't like that. I'm just going to remove that. Once around the camp and on the road, they no longer tried to avoid being seen. Speed was of greater importance than stealth when on an island about ready to explode. A cry went up behind them from the drivers of the wagons currently on the road, but they were slow and there were no guards with them. Not paying them any heed, they continued racing toward the docks and their only chance to make it off the island alive. How far is it? Jerome asked. Not sure, James replied as he began to get a stitch in his side. Maybe another mile or two. Then turning to Essen, he said, Here, as he handed the unconscious Nate back to him. I may need my strength when we get to the docks. Once Nate was back upon Essen's shoulder, James was better able to continue running. The ground trembled anew as shockwaves rippled outward from the mine. It's not going to be much longer. Suddenly, the road opened onto a clearing. The dock lay over 100 yards ahead. Two wagons were being unloaded as a dozen people transferred the iron bars to the only ship docked. A dozen guards stood watch. When they entered the clearing and had covered half the distance, one of the workers saw them and gave the alarm. The 12 guards turned and drew their swords as they moved to intercept them before they could reach the ship. Stones gathered along the way flew toward the advancing guards, taking out 5 before they took a dozen strides. Using a tactic from an old war movie, James took out the ones at the rear to keep the forward ones from realizing their numbers were decreasing. What old war movie was that? Sergeant York, starring Gary Cooper. Oh, great movie. True story, too. He won the a conscious objector won the Congressional Medal of Honor. Well, his strategy, see, he related to Pusher, the guy who was there, that he used to hunt turkeys. And if there's a line of turkeys walking, if you shoot the first one, they'll scatter. But if you shoot the rear one, then the front ones won't know what's going on, and you can get them all, and before they even realize what's going on. So, James watched the movie, learned the tactic. Now he's using it there. He takes out the rear one, and the ones in the front don't know they're being killed, so he can take out more before they take evasive action. Then he let loose with magic, and the ground erupted, throwing another 5 into the air. Jerome advanced upon the remaining 2 knives at the ready. The first one closed with him as he deflected the sword thrust. The first one closed with him, and he deflected the sword thrust as he followed through with the cross-hand swipe. The guard danced back as Jerome's blade missed the guard's chest by a fraction of an inch. The workers on the dock, having seen the guards taken out so readily and the ground erupting before their eyes, fled for their lives away from the wagons and the dock. The ship's captain barked orders as he attempted to move his ship away from the dock before they had a chance to approach. Essen laid Nate on the ground and grabbed the nearby stick as he went to aid Jerome. He came up behind the second man engaged with Jerome and struck him in the back of the head. The man staggered a few steps before dropping to the ground. Jerome glanced over to Essen, gave him a slight nod as he continued to fight with the remaining guard. Michael saw the boat begin to pull away and hauled over James. "The boat is leaving!" Looking to it, James realized it was already a good 5 feet from the dock and departing steadily. Magic surged out of him as he created an invisible tether from the dock to the boat. The ship suddenly lurched to a stop. The captain shouted orders to his crew, but nothing they did moved his ship 1 inch farther. Beginning to pant with all the magical exertions, James shortened the tether and gradually brought the boat back to the dock. Spots danced before his eyes as he sank to one knee from the effort. He glanced over to Jerome and watched as the remaining guards fell to the ground. Jerome turned to find James at the edge of the dock on one knee. He raced to his side while Essen and Michael brought forward the unconscious Nate. As the boat was pulled back to the dock, James saw the captain and crew with swords drawn, ready to sell their lives dearly if they must. "Request permission to come aboard, Captain." "Why should I let you?" the captain hollered back. "Because your ship isn't going anywhere until we do," James told him. "This island is about to erupt in a volcanic explosion of cataclysmic proportions, and we need to be as far away as possible." As if to add credence to his words, the grounds began to shake violently. James was unable to remain upright and fell. Trees throughout the forest crashed to the ground, and from the mine another blast erupted into the sky. When the ground once again calmed, they returned to their feet. The others gathered around James as he stood before the ship. When Essen and Michael drew close, the captain saw him and his eyes widened. "Nate?" James looked over to Nate and then back to the captain. "You know him?" "Aye," he replied. "He's my cousin." Turning to his men, he signaled for them to lower their weapons and then returned his own sword to his scabbard. "Permission granted," he said, waving them forward. "Hurry and come aboard." As they moved toward the ship, a mob exited the forest behind them. Consisting of both slaves and guards from the compound, they swarmed into the clearing, hell-bent on reaching the ship and safety. "Come on," the captain yelled, and then barked out orders to his crew as they once more got the ship underway. Then from out of the sky, a hail of hot stones. They pelted the ship and those coming aboard from where they had been belched from the belly of the emerging volcano. One struck James in the head, causing him to falter and fall. Jerome leaped forward and helped him to his feet. He half carried him across the gangplank to the ship's deck. Michael turned and gasped when he saw one-armed Blacktooth in the fore of the advancing mob. From somewhere, he'd acquired a sword and had it gripped in his remaining hand. When their eyes locked, an evil grin spread across his face as he quickened his pace to reach Michael. "Michael!" Jerome yelled from where he stood on the ship. "Hurry up!" When Michael and Essen reached the gangplank, Captain was there, and he took charge of Nate as they boarded the ship. 2 crewmen pulled in the gangplank as the wind filled the sails, and the ship began to sail away from the dock. Now that James no longer held a captive. I'm gonna make James's tether no longer held a captive. Before the ship was able to put enough distance between them and the dock, a few of the people running toward them tried jumping the distance between the dock and the ship. Most landed in the water. Most fell short and landed in the water, but a couple managed to reach the deck. Blacktooth was among those to make this. Blacktooth was among those to make the ship's deck. Crying out triumphantly as he landed on the deck, he turned toward Michael, who stood less than a yard away, and raised his sword to end his life. Michael looked at death coming for him and then closed his eyes as he braced for the end. As Blacktooth struck, he suddenly gasped and faltered. Michael opened his eyes and saw a crossbow bolt sticking out of Blacktooth's chest. Blood welled forth and flowed down the front of his body. Staggering to the side, Blacktooth looked down at the bolt. With a cry of animal ferocity, he again lurched toward Michael, intent on killing him with his last ounce of strength. Another bolt struck him in the shoulder, causing him to drop his sword. Coming forward with the crossbow still in hand, Essen approached and said, "This is for killing my crew." He swung the crossbow with both hands and slammed it into Blacktooth's face. Black teeth went flying. Staggering back from the blow, he tottered precariously on the ship's edge. Michael stepped forward and pushed him over and watched him hit the water. He floundered a moment before disappearing beneath the surface. Essen came up behind Michael and patted him on the shoulder. "Good riddance." Michael nodded. "Wish the others could have made it." "So do I, lad," his one-time taskmaster replied. "So do I." Only one of the others who had reached the ship with Blacktooth still lived. He was another slave that Essen knew and would vouch for his good behavior. As they continued to pull away, the others remaining at the dock cried and pleaded for them to return, but the captain ordered his men to make all speed for open water. "Put this god-forsaken island behind us." "How is he?" The captain asked Michael as he came to see how his cousin Nate was doing. "I don't know," replied Michael. "He was poisoned. The others who were poisoned are all dead, but he didn't drink as much." "Guess we'll know after a while," said the captain. "Never thought to see him alive again." James came to the captain and offered his hand. When the captain took it, he said, "Appreciate you allowing us on, Captain." "Didn't do it for you," he said. "Though after what you did to the guards, I was of a mind to allow you on anyway. But when I saw Nate, that clinched it." "We appreciate it anyway," he assured him. Suddenly, from the north end of the island, a gigantic explosion threw a tremendous volume of rock and magma into the air. Several other spots on the island began to erupt as well. "There she goes," James mumbled. Steam rose from the ocean off the northern point of the island, and soon magma shot upward from there too. "By the gods," the captain explained at the sight. "Full sails," he hollered up to the man in the rigging. To the man at the wheel he shouted, "Straight away to open water." "Aye, aye, Captain," the man at the wheel replied as he altered the ship's course accordingly. As the ship sailed away, James watched several different areas where magma burst through the surface of the sea. A whole chain of volcanoes was being created, and the heat from them could be felt even from this distance. He felt badly. Everyone that had been left on the island was dead or soon would be. He couldn't conceive of anyone surviving what was happening. He went to the captain and asked, "Where do you plan to take us?" The captain looked at him for a second and then said, "Carillion. It's where Nate's family resides. They should take you in and help you for saving his life." "Carillion," he pondered as he watched the volcanoes erupting in the distance. And now for the epilogue. I don't know that much about sailing. I've never sailed that much. Most what I get is from old Errol Flynn pirate movies. So yeah, a lot of the dialogue and terminology, Errol Flynn. Yeah, Captain Blood. Yeah, I love Errol Flynn. Okay, now I'm gonna do the epilogue, and we're done. Standing alone, staring out his window from the highest room of the tower, he again burned with anger at the destruction that had been wrought. A day ago, smoke rose from the iron mines at Sorna, just before it was engulfed by a series of erupting volcanoes. Shortly afterward, a great wall of water surged from the sea and washed away a good portion of the dock area at Terustali. Burning with impotent rage, unable to vent it upon the one that had brought him to his being, he just stood there. "A mage," he replied, "a single mage, and so much destruction." The last several days, rumors had reached him concerning strange occurrences to the north, some hardly credible. A demon walked from an oasis which had dried earlier the same day, and then water poured from the ground miles away. Even here in Terustali, a giant with a flaming sword supposedly strode down the street. What was going on? From everything he had been able to gather, these things occurred after the fall of the City of Light. He knew that venture had been ill-fated, but his counsel hadn't been heeded. A noise behind him caused him to turn, and the sight both filled him with anticipation and dread. A small creature, only a foot in height, sat upon the table behind him. Its scaly, somewhat man-like form was bent as if from a lifetime of carrying too much weight. Red eyes that glowed with an inner light stared from its gnarled head at Abula Maski with cruel intelligence. "A Hekuli!" Abula Maski exclaimed aloud. The Hekuli met his gaze for a moment before vanishing. Abul Maski instantly understood the significance of such a visit. Only one person on this world commanded the Hukuli. Looking back toward the destruction wrought under his dominion, he realized there could be only one reason for him to be summoned to the high temple. With the thought, he summoned one of his acolytes waiting in the adjoining room, who immediately opened the door and entered. A Hukuli has come. He saw the fear and uncertainty in the man's eyes. The acolyte nodded in answer and then left, closing the door behind him. Abulamowski turned back to the window, contemplating the summons until the door again opened. The acolyte returned with others bearing Abulamowski's armor and sword. He remained still as he allowed them to put heavy armor upon him and strap his sword belt around his waist. As his acolytes prepared him for his audience with the high priest of Damanli, he continued to stare out the window at the destruction. When the last strap had been secured, they quietly turned and filed out of the door, leaving him once more alone. Turning from the window, he walked to a nearby wall and said, Perun Ali Morgana. A section of the wall disappeared, leaving an opening that led into an adjoining room. No one but Abulamowski had ever been within this room, at least none living at this time. Stepping within, he walked to the center where sat a raised dais. Inscribed upon the dais was the symbol of the warrior priest of Damanli. 3 dots formed the points of a triangle with connecting lines in between. Stepping upon the dais, he activated the magic within and in a heartbeat stood upon a matching pedestal in the middle of a small, ill-lit room. A solitary candle burned in a nearby wall niche, doing its best to keep back the shadows of this grim place. The room was cold, cold to the skin and cold to the soul. A cowled figure stood waiting, and as soon as Abulamowski's eyes fell upon him, he turned to leave without a word. Without hesitation, Abulamowski stepped off the dais and followed the cowled figure out of the room and down a long corridor. He had come this way several times before, but never with a dread filling him now. As he walked, more of the Hukuli popped in and out to see who had come and then went to inform their master. None can walk the halls of Ith-Zerul without gaining their notice. They arrived to the entrance to the halls of despair, the audience chamber of Osgaroth, high priest of Damanli. The cowled figure that had led them there waited until he passed into the room before turning around and leaving. If the rest of Ith-Zerul was cold, this room was absolutely frigid. Across the room from where he entered loomed a seat made entirely of bones, some human, others not. On either side of the dark throne stood 2 braziers burning with a purplish glow that seemed to drain the warmth from Abulamowski as he approached. Seated upon the throne was a dark figure. Glowing eyes, yellow and piercing, stared out from the shadows surrounding the throne. When he reached the requisite distance, he fell to his knees and bowed. I have come, great one, he said in reverence to the figure before him. Arise, he heard Osgaroth's command, though it hadn't come so much as a voice, but as a thought. Rising to his feet, he stood there in humility, waiting. The star shines again, the voice said. Gasping, Abulamowski lifted his head and looked directly at Osgaroth. The star of Morside? Say not that name here, the voice commanded. I plead forgiveness, master, he said, then again bowed his head. But yes, the voice replied, it again moves across the land. I had thought all were destroyed during the Great Purging. No, Osgaroth replied, they were not. Some escaped. Fear of being chastised for the destruction of his dominion began to leave him. If he was here for that reason, they would hardly be having this conversation. What would you have me do, master? Hunt for the one bearing the star. Abulamowski raised his head and stared into his eyes, and bring him to me. And that concludes the Fires of Prophecy. I'll get started with Warrior Priest when I'm done with the Relic of the Ancients. You all have a good time. Later.